Elesh Norn, Mother of Machines, is a very powerful card that has a lot of unique rules implications, and I wanted to talk about some of them today, specifically how Elesh Norn interacts with sagas. So sagas enter the battlefield, have a counter placed upon them, and then one of their chapters, well, the first chapter usually, although read ahead kind of changed that, but one of their chapters triggers and an ability occurs. So in that situation, we have a number of moving parts. The one that Elesh Norn cares about is, does a permanent enter the battlefield and cause an ability to trigger? In the case of sagas, that the answer to that is actually no, believe it or not. When the saga enters the battlefield, it feels like that first chapter behaves like an enter the battlefield trigger in a lot of situations, right? Because I just played a permanent, it's now stuck on the board, and an ability triggered. Therefore, it's easy to assume this permanent entering the battlefield caused this ability to trigger. However, there was in fact an additional step in there. And that's explained in the reminder text at the top of the Fable the Mirror Breaker that we have up here on screen. As this saga enters, and after your draw step, add a lore counter. So the magic word there, believe it or not, is as this saga enters, and after your draw step. So as these things are occurring, you're putting lore counters on it. The addition of the lore counter does not use the stack and is not considered a triggered ability. If the ruling on sagas read, when this saga enters the battlefield and after your draw step, add a lore counter. But then you would notice the way that would play out on Arena, Fail the Mirror Breaker would hit, a trigger would go on the stack. That trigger would resolve, a counter would appear, then another trigger would go on the stack, and then chapter 1 would happen. You note it doesn't do that. You drop it, the counter shows up, and then it fires. And those are the only sequences. That's it. So as a result, that ability is not considered an enter the battlefield effect. And so the question, does Elesh Norn interact with sagas? Your answer is no. It's that simple. Elesh Norn does not interact with sagas in any way. Now, that is different from another praetor that we saw not too long ago in Kaldheim in Vorinclex. Vorinclex did interact with sagas because it said if an opponent would put one or more counters on a permanent or player, you put half that many of each of those counters on that permanent or player instead, and if you would put them on, you double them. So in that case, it's modifying the number of counters that are going on a thing every time you would put a counter on anything for any reason. Doesn't care if it's part of a triggered ability, a state-based action, didn't matter. If counters are going on a thing, Vorinclex cares. Elesh Norn, however, doesn't care about counters. She cares about triggered abilities. And in the case of sagas, we don't have triggered abilities. Now, a couple of other quick notes. This also is true for creatures that enter the battlefield with counters, such as Shivan Devastator or other Hydras in older formats. These cards say they enter the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. They do not say when this creature enters, add X counters to them or put X counters on them. If that was the case, that would matter. In this case, it does not. So they enter with the counters. So that is a slight difference. Now you'll notice for ETBs that are impacted, we have the verbiage when. So for example, we have Aether Channeler. When Aether Channeler enters the battlefield, choose one. And I wanted to point out Aether Channeler specifically to call it another nuance to the way Elesh Norn works. If you are controlling Elesh Norn and you play an Aether Channeler that has a modal ability on it, it will trigger twice and you will be able to select different modes. It does not, the way that it works is it does not lock in your selection on the first one and then copy that. You get a second copy of the trigger, and that starts from the very beginning. So if you pick the 1/1 bird token as the first thing for the Aether Channeler that you're going to get, that's fine. You could then also draw a card, on the second trigger, or you could draw 2 cards, or you could mix and match, which is pretty great. Also, to that end, you can select different targets. It's just like modes. All these selections that you make for these triggers can be done on a trigger by trigger basis if they are doubled with Elesh Norn. So that's pretty darn cool. I point out Brutal Cathar because it targets creatures when it enters. And so you will get 2 separate triggers that do have complete distinct decision-making processes. You could theoretically target the same thing if you wanted to, but I wouldn't recommend it. But yeah, so anyway, that was a quick kind of summary. Elesh Norn, Mother of Machines. If you are doubling triggers with her abilities, you will be able to select multiples. Also, to that end, if a saga enters the battlefield under your control, it goes through its progression normally. You do not get chapter 1 twice. Sorry, just what it is. So keep that in mind. Thank you so much for checking out the video. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.